Anytime you get into armed conflict with another state, organization, individual, something's failed before you got there. The norms of diplomacy, the norms of conflict resolution have failed. So warfare should be your last resort. You should be looking at diplomatic, information, economic, different levers of power to try to avoid conflict, because armed conflict means we're down to no other option, essentially. And as these norms deteriorate, we lower the bar of where conflict seems to be the right answer. And that's unfortunate. It should be that the diplomats are the ones who are at the forefront, not the military.
Yeah. So when you think about just all of these combat missions that you flew across Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Iraq, like what were kind of some of your big takeaways that you then carried into the next stage of your career?
Just like I said, teamwork, the fact that you can rely on people. If you give them the opportunity and the training, if you give them the skill set to be a part of the team, people respond to that. Absolutely. They want to be a contributor. I often say that no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be a jerk today. They typically wake up and they're like, what can I do today that's going to be good?
Yeah. So what was it like to be on the other side of you when now you're working with the pilot, not the pilot? How did that experience play out for you? Not having the control, maybe.
As a commander?
Yeah.
Absolutely trust.
Yeah.
Trust in these young. So I'm in my 50s and I'm speaking with those 22-year-olds who are now responsible, and trust in the training that they've had, not giving them too much responsibility at first to have to make the most gut-wrenching decisions if we don't have to, but knowing that if they're put in those situations, they've been trained for them. And if they're not trained for them, they shouldn't be in them. So it was, again, your responsibility changes as a commander from when you were but the pilot or the person on the ground. Your responsibility now is to try to make sure that all of those things that I just talked about are put together. The teamwork, the reviews of legality, all of those become something that you're responsible for.
Okay. So as a commander, you were the executive officer to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. What in the world is that?
So the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe is the military general responsible for NATO. So NATO has two parts to it. It has a political arm and it has a military arm. And the military arm is commanded by the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. The military is all about acronyms. So SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR.
Yeah.
Very first SACEUR was General Eisenhower, basically World War II.
Okay.
He was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. So there have been generations of general officers and admirals that have been responsible for that position. And my job as the executive officer is I was the easiest way to describe it is like I was the personal chief of staff. I made sure that his aides, travel, policy, all of that got vetted. SACEUR is a equivalent to a head of state in terms of meeting with individuals in Europe. So we would meet with heads of state of NATO nations and non-NATO nations to work through policies, collaboration. It was a great time. It was a very challenging.
What years was that for you?
I was there from 2007-ish to 2009.
Okay. So, there's a lot of talk about NATO, particularly in the last decade. What would you want people to know about NATO itself and its role that maybe is underappreciated or people don't know?
So NATO is really a wonder. It's brought together nations that have been in conflict with each other before and continue to have relationships that sometimes are awkward. But under the banner of NATO, we cooperate. And we can achieve many things. So I consider it to be an absolute positive international organization for collaboration and for presenting a united front when we consider threats that are out there.
Yeah. So is the person that's in the role that you were in, like in regards to the whole situation with Russia invading Ukraine, like, is that a big part of their role now?
It is.
That conflict is
It is. That's firmly in the job jar of NATO and SACEUR.
Okay.
So in fact, when I was in the role, Russia had just invaded Georgia. And so we were trying to understand what the response was going to be. And again, the diplomats got involved and they were able to prevent something that would have been horrific, conflict between NATO and Russia. We need to be careful about that even today, but we also have to stand up for the principles of what's right amongst nations. What is behavior amongst nations?
When you were the 450 Air Expeditionary Wing at the Bagram airfield. What was that like? Are you actually in Afghanistan when you're
Mhm.
doing that? So the whole time, and then what's that role look like?
So I had multiple roles. I was a pilot, so I flew
Okay.
combat missions, just like
Okay, so you actually were flying combat when you were there.
they're just
Oh,
like the
okay.
young guys.
Okay.
But thankfully, I was more experienced, so I had
Yeah.
experience to rely, as we talked about earlier. But my role and responsibility really was to have oversight of safety and security, mission accomplishment, logistical support for essentially the northern part of Afghanistan. There was an equivalent base in southern Afghanistan at the same time that I was there that generally had responsible for what was going on in the south. And so Bagram was that key base or out of which all these operations would occur, whether they were flight operations or ground operations that were out in different parts of Afghanistan. So my
Mhm.
job was to make sure that we had the platform of Bagram, and that it was safe and secure, that we flew missions out of there to support not only air issues, but ground issues mostly, and then the logistical support for all of the operations.
And did you also interface or train with any of the Afghan government military?
So we had partnerships with the Afghan military, the Afghan security services, the Afghan police as we attempted to execute operations in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So what years were you in Afghanistan?
10 to 11.
Okay, so only a year. Okay.
Yeah, it's about 13, 14 months that you're there.
What came after Afghanistan?
I went back to the big Air Force, and I went to Winnipeg, Canada, as
Okay.
right. I was the uh, deputy commander for the Canadian NORAD region, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. It's the
Okay.
command that defends the skies over Canada and the United States. And we have this wonderful relationship with Canada when it comes to NORAD. In Canada, there's a general officer that's Canadian that's responsible for that airspace, but the deputy is an American. In the United States, the commander of the area in the United States is a American general, and their deputy is a Canadian. So we kind of trade.
Okay. You're obviously American, but you've interacted with all these different countries and you've had to, work with them and understand where they're coming from and collaborate. Like what did that teach you? What leadership insight did that give you to have that kind of larger point of view perspective? Because often we're like, I'm in my house, I'm in my city, and here you are like at the global level. So help us understand that.
I think you have to have some cultural intelligence when you work with different cultures. You can't just mirror what you think a Western or a U.S. perspective is on someone else. But you have
Hmm.
to listen. You have to talk. You have to be able to understand where they're coming from because they may have very different mindsets about basic things, individual rights, collective rights. What's in the art of the possible? So the
Hmm.
U.S. has just a lot of resources. Some of the nations that we worked with had almost none.
Hmm.
And you have to come to them where they're at. And you can't just kind of demand that they meet you where you're at because there's no way they can. And
Hmm.
so how do you integrate their capabilities, which are unique strengths? How do you
Yeah.
integrate those strengths into the team so that not only just do they feel a part of the team, but they're actually contributors in a very important way? And we're generally able to do that. So you have to have this cultural intelligence. You also have to be willing to, I don't want to say disagree, but at least have harder conversations
Hmm.
in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Because if you just placate someone, they know it. And
Mm.
that's not, if you're condescending or if you are dismissive, they're going to know that. And you undermine the relationship. But
Okay.
when you look at them and say, look, I know we've got this and you've got that, and how can we make these things work together and be contributors to in both directions? But sometimes you gotta have the harder conversation to do that. And
Yeah.
having some diplomacy and the ability to do that, I think, is a very important skill.
Yeah. So you ended up shifting into education. Why didn't you just retire and go live in Hawaii? What happened to you?
I It was super clear that my wife not ready for me to just hang around the house. I had 5 different year-long deployments. I have 3
Three
kids.
kids.
They're all born in Europe. She's a very independent, super awesome lady, and I don't think she would have wanted me hanging around the house too much. She's got her
Yeah.
own. feng shui that she does, and she's great at it. She's the best logistician I ever knew. We moved, we've moved 21 times, and she's been in
Wow.
charge of that move. She's been in charge of every move because she does the logistics for it. So that's what
So
she should.
what advice would she give us about how to effectively move?
Oh, I think it's all about information management. How do you gather information early? How do you make a plan? She's a
Yeah.
great planner when it comes to that kind of stuff. And then how do you execute that plan? Just fabulous. And so
Yeah.
we been married 38 years, and she's been awesome. But I think I would have disrupted the feng shui in her house if I'd have been just hanging around.
Yeah.
I started looking around, and I had some opportunities to do some different things, but I was really attracted to the concept of higher education. I have 3 masters and a doctorate, and I like higher ed.
Yeah. What are your degrees in?
Let's see. So I have one in international relations, I have one in international economics, and I have one in strategic studies. And then my
Okay.
doctorate is in education, leadership, and innovation. Think
Mm,
organizational behavioral theory is kind of really where it's at. And that's from New
yeah.
York University.
Okay. So is the rescue mission the first thing that you do? Do I
No,
have that
I
right
went to
or no?
higher ed first, and I went to
Oh,
New York University. I went to NYU.
okay.
I was there about 4 years, and then I got this phone call. I had been
Okay.
on the board of directors of this rescue mission in Colorado Springs in my last assignment in the military. And
Okay.
the then CEO wanted to retire, and they were looking around for someone that they thought might be a good person for to fill in that role next. The board of directors called me, prayerfully considered it with my wife and my family, and we thought it's probably something that God's asking me to do. I probably should have an answer, and the answer was yes. And so we went back to Colorado Springs from New York, and I was the CEO of the rescue mission for about 4 years.
Okay. So I want to ask you about that. But before I do, you've moved, you said 19 times? 21. And you have 3 kids.
Yes.
What advice do you have for parents that move their kids a lot? Because that's, I imagine, rough on kids.
Yeah, I would say it is. Their therapists say that they're resilient, and they are. All 3 of them are incredibly resilient, and they're very self-initiators. They can handle themselves, and
Okay.
I think part of that was these experiences that they had.
Mm,
There are certainly downsides to it. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. They had a hard time keeping friends because, of course, they changed every 2 or 3 years, sometimes even faster than that. And so, I think that their experience was enriching, but it was also very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And that's a sacrifice that military family and military spouses and military children bear that is often not understood very well outside of the military community.
Yeah.
Are you a small business owner? Have you hit a glass ceiling where year over year, you cannot rise above a certain revenue level? Check out Jason Scott Montoya's book, The Jump, to discover how to level up your leadership and pivot your entrepreneurial passion to the highest level.